back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
This is your land. Take it in your hand. This is your land.
Welcome to the Law Show on CL 650. We are joined in studio today by Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kisher from MKS Law in downtown Vancouver, immigration lawyers and partners there. And we're talking about, now, Rudy, I'll get you to do it this time. We're talking about a document that's been circulated in your community about immigration and possible changes coming up. And how was this obtained?
Well, there was a town hall meeting in the Don Valley riding, which, if you don't know, that's in Toronto. It's very close to actually where I grew up. The minister, John McCallum, is the Minister of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada. McCallum was supposed to speak there. He didn't. The Chief of Staff came and spoke, and his name was Bernie Darrable. And he spoke to the crowd, and somebody there passed some notes on some speaking notes of what they heard onto an immigration consultant that has now sort of circulated it among immigration lawyers. So we have sort of about 17 points of sort of issues that we believe the department may be going forward on. Of course, how accurate these are and how far they are along in policy formation, we don't know, but I think that they're giving us a good insight into what we can expect.
A good sort of high-level look at what could be coming, right?
Yeah.
All right. Now, this one might get some people's eyebrows raised a little bit. From the Chief of Staff, there will be a path to permanent resident or citizenship for all people who are foreign workers.
Yeah, this is I think this is very interesting because the Conservatives were in power for 9 years. And what we saw happen under the Conservatives was an increase in the temporary foreign working period where we allowed a lot of temporary foreign workers in. And then the thought in that process was, well, this is a great way to get our immigrants, because what we're going to do is test run them. Let's see how they work out. If they work here, the employers like them, they can keep a job, they'll have Canadian experience, and it'll be easier for them to they'll be more successful permanent residents. And I guess the thought process that we talked about just earlier, there was a 4-year restriction. So if you weren't successful or you weren't able to immigrate, then you'd be sent home. You went back, right? So
now that sounds great. Why didn't that work?
Well, I don't know if it sounds great for everybody. I don't know if everybody believes it's great. I think there's a segment out there.
Try it before you buy it, right?
Try it before you buy it. But how comfortable are people with the idea that, well, you've come here, you're working, and you've been here for 4 years or 5 years, and now, for some reason, your language isn't good enough, you don't have exactly an indeterminate job offer, you're not going to qualify for immigration. So this seems to be suggesting that the Liberals don't feel very comfortable with having temporary foreign workers, now I don't know how accurate this statement is, to be fair to them, that don't have an avenue to permanent residence. And we have a lot of temporary foreign workers that come in here that are really just temporary foreign workers. A program that's been around for decades is our agricultural.
They have no
foreigner.
intention to stay.
And they're not set up that way. The whole program for the agricultural foreign workers that come in here, they come in here for the short growing season. So sometimes they're only here for 3 to 4 months. They work and they go back every year. So there is no path to permanent residency for those people ever. Skiing instructors are another one. They come here for a short time period. They can do the ski instructor. They don't get permanent experience. They don't get a permanent job offer. And
you have to be Australian to work at a ski resort. That's what I've come. I go to Whistler and as a g'day, it's like, why? Where are all the Canadian students that could be doing these jobs? Are they still in bed? I don't know. At the beach.
I know my kid's still in bed.
So this sounds like this sounds like it's from one extreme to the other. Now, anybody who's a temporary foreign worker will have a path to permanent residency.
I think it's a misstatement. I don't believe it for 1 minute.
No?
No. And look, the criteria for approving a temporary foreign worker is different from the criteria for selecting permanent residence. And there's no good reason to say that all temporary foreign workers should have a path to permanent residency and citizenship. No good reason for it whatsoever. It's inappropriate. So I think this statement is one that we take with a huge grain of salt and just move on.
Well, I think maybe could it be that they're eligible to apply doesn't mean they're going to get in. Well, they would be anyway, right? Any temporary foreign worker is eligible.
Anybody can try and apply.
Right.
Not everybody is going to be accepted.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can't even apply. You can get an expression of interest, right? But I mean, if you're in as a temporary foreign worker, are they going to adjust the system? As we talked about in the last show, we see adjustments coming to that to lower the bar, perhaps to get people, to let certain people in. What's going to be the result of that? I don't think we know.
So the downfall of if this was to go forward is that we're we're basically letting anybody who wants to come in, and then you have people who get upset that what does it mean to get into the country? It's a low bar.
Yeah, I think the problem is, are those people going to be successful immigrants, right? If we lower the bar, people have come here to work, but for some reason they're not finding an avenue to immigration. Perhaps the reason is they're not going to be successful. We've selected a program of which we're only looking for successful immigrants. But we also have, and Gordon and I were discussing about this earlier, what is the number of immigrants that we're looking for, right? So if we don't have a cap, then are we willing to take as many immigrants as apply? Now, I don't think that's a system the Liberal is proposing, but that if you have a system like that every temporary foreign worker will have a pathway to immigration, then you're going to have a problem on the other end in terms of what's your cap in terms of numbers, right?
Now, are there countries around the world that have had this come one, come all approach, and have they seen that? Any countries?
In the last century?
Yeah.
No. Most, I mean, there was a time period when almost every immigrant was welcome because it was
to populate the country.
You populate the country and you get tax relief. You didn't have social service that you had prior.
Yeah, you have to pay for things, yeah.
Now we have to pay, we provide education stuff, so there's a cost. Right?
All right, what's the next one, Gordon?
All spouses will go to 6 months processing, and a special task force is working on eliminating the backlog now.
So what is the problem now?
Right now, depending on where you apply and which program you apply under, spouses sometimes are waiting 2 years before they get processed, and that's ridiculous.
And so they're living offshore somewhere else?
No, those ones are usually in Canada already.
They're here,
which is why they're giving work permits to them to keep them happy in the meantime. Offshore, they're getting just different processing times. But the whole processing system is undergoing changes. But the one with spouses was a problematic one because we just didn't see a good reason for the delay. Part of it had to do with policy, that these were non-economic immigrants, and if you had a policy that you wanted to promote economic immigration, then you would deliberately keep the numbers down on spouses.
So you're saying that's maybe a stay-at-home mom or somebody who's not providing income?
They're just not defined as being economic immigrants. They're given immigration to Canada based on their spousal relationship and not on their human qualities of economic benefit. So at any rate, the idea that policy is going to go to achieve 6 month processing, and we're seeing changes now. We're seeing them now. New applications in particular, are sometimes being achieved with great speed.
Yeah, I think you can imagine how upsetting it is as a Canadian, where you're waiting 2 years to have your wife, probably the most important person in your life, come to Canada. Meanwhile, a chef that's working down the street at at Milestones is ending up with is able to immigrate within 12 months under the express entry system, and you're the taxpayer, you're the national, and meanwhile somebody else is qualifying before your wife gets here. To me, it's unfair, and they're doing the right thing by fixing it.
So is this different than? Walk me through this. You come to the country. Say the husband gets through the express system and is in the country. Is that not what we're talking about?
No,
and the wife is not.
No, we're talking about a Canadian citizen,
right?
Goes to Europe for a summer vacation,
meets somebody, falls
in love, proposes to her, and then wants to bring her to Canada.
Okay.
And then if that person was in Singapore being processed, so they're Japanese and they're being processed out of Singapore or something, they're being processed out of Philippines now, but Singapore applications are taking sometimes 2 years.
Okay.
So you can imagine you go to
that's a real strain on a relationship, especially a new one.
Yeah.
Or if a foreigner was here as a student or a worker and a Canadian citizen fell in love with them, married them here in Canada, and say, I want to process them to permanent residence from within Canada. Those applications are still taking 2 years right now. So you have to keep the person on temporary residence status through that time. What they've done there is put in a policy of issuing them a work permit at an early stage. They haven't been able to process them quickly, but at least the individual gets their status adjusted a bit to make it a little bit more
And you can
palatable.
imagine that poor person now, if they want to buy a house, though, has to pay an extra 15% tax.
Well, it all comes back to the old saying, happy wife, happy life, right?
I live by that, Max.
you bring the wife to Canada and everybody's happy, right, Gordon?
Yep.
Okay, what's the next one?
Dependency, going back to 21. So what does this mean? When somebody's immigrating to Canada, they are allowed to bring, included in that application, what we call their dependent family members. So that includes the spouse, number one, and their dependent children. So what is a dependent child? The old rules used to be if the person was younger, it was 21 or younger, right? So on the date of the application was filed with the Immigration Department, they were 21 or younger. Or if they were over the age of 21, they were still in school full-time and had been continuously in school full-time. This created a massive problem for the department in terms of trying to, the 18-year-old, 19-year-old wasn't a problem, even the 20, 21-year-old. The problem you had is when you had the 26-year-old, 28, 29-year-old that had been waiting, for example, in Iran, where processing times were taking 6 years. So an investor immigrant goes to apply to immigrate to Canada. His kids are 21 years old. He meets the definition when we apply.
But he's not still in school.
You got to keep him in school.
Right.
So you got to enroll him in school. Then the question becomes, the department says, well, was he really going to school? Well, he paid for the classes. Did he pass the classes? He was a horrible student. So there was all this litigation that came about this saying, because the department was saying, well, we don't believe he was a genuine student. So lawyers were taking cases, the court and say, well, that's not the definition.
Somebody's 26 or 28 has left school and has started working.
So
you can't stop your life waiting to see if you're going to get into Canada, right?
And so what the department did is, because they were bringing this express system, they also rolled back the age of dependency to 18, which to me seems unreasonably harsh. So, we have clients here now that are in Canada with their families, been working here for 5 years. Their kid is turning 19. Well, now all of a sudden the kid's not a dependent, won't be able to immigrate with the parents.
From what I hear, the children are dependent until they're 30. They go to university and they come back.
So, if 18 is not the number, what is the number? And the government has decided that 21 will be the number.
There's lots of 30-year-olds living in their parents' basement playing video games.
And do we want them as immigrants becomes the question.
We don't see anything here about whether they're going to bring back the overage dependent through studies. So
I haven't seen that. This is all I've seen batted around.
Changing 19 to 21, under 19 to 21.
Now, another one that was floated out there, the citizenship rules are going back to the old 3 out of 4 years. Now, explain what it was and how it changed and how it could revert back to the old system.
The old citizenship requirement was that you had to reside in Canada as a permanent resident for 3 years, and you got to look back 4 years to find those 3 years of residency. So you had to be here 75% of the time, feet in Canada, more or less, for 3 years. You could also count your time in Canada before being a permanent resident if you were here as a worker or a student, up to a maximum of 1 year based on 50% credit. So if you were a student here for 2 years before becoming a permanent resident, that counted as 1 year credit of time. The citizenship test was then changed. The new act said that, no, we want to have 4 years out of 6 of time in Canada. And there was no credit given for time prior to being a permanent resident if you were here as a student or worker. So now they're talking about rolling back to the old test.
Oh, was there anything wrong with the 4 out of 6? Was it just a higher bar?
It's a higher bar. So they ran on that platform. The Liberals ran on that platform that they thought it was putting, in terms of integration in society, a lot of economists and a lot of, sociologists, et cetera, look at the sooner somebody can get integrated and feel like they belong part of a society, the sooner they're going to fit in. So putting it too far off is not a good thing. And so they've gone back. They ran on, the Conservatives changed it just shortly, about a year before the election. And the Liberals ran on a platform that they were going to bring it back. So I think that we're going to see it come back to 3 out of 6.
I know I read in the Asian community, they call it the 4-year jail sentence.
I almost threw up the first time I heard that in my office.
They call it the 4-year jail sentence, and there was all kinds of fraud going on about when passports were fraudulently stamped. So they would say, oh, well, so-and-so has been here for the 4 years, but meanwhile, they had their passports stamped and they were back maybe in China, for example.
There was a case of, I believe it was a lawyer that was keeping, so they would declare their passport lost, get a new passport. The lawyer would keep the passport in his safe for 4 years until a person was ready to apply, and then use the lost passport and submit it and saying that he'd never left the country.
Well, there was another consultant who just got sentenced to 7 years in jail for massive passport fraud, falsifying stamps and passports for the purposes of PR card renewals and citizenship exams.
And there was another guy, he had about 3,000 cases where he had set up the delivery out. So he would go as far as applying for tax credits, get them a cell phone, get them a mailing address, pay hydro bills, etc., and would all go to this one it would all go to this one address. And eventually an officer started seeing that these addresses were the
address
same.
pop up.
So they sent someone to go check on it. They went and opened the door. It was a brick wall behind it. There was absolutely nothing there. And then they started to investigate, and they found there was about 3,000 cases like that. And that's what brought about these changes, was this massive fraud that was going on.
Well, I would suspect a lot of Canadians would say, well, let's make it harder than easier to get in to be Canadian.
Well, I don't know that 3 out of 4 years is so generous as opposed to 4 out of 6. I don't see a big difference there. I think the important thing is that people are actually here, that they are actually rubbing shoulders, that they're engaging in the community.
So how do you enforce that? Because when you leave Canada, nobody stamps your passport. Like when you go to China, you get a little piece of paper. And if you don't have that little piece of paper when you leave, you're in trouble. In Canada, easy come, easy go.
Citizenship has become a lot more diligent about challenging claims of residence in Canada.
Well, that's good.
Yes, and I think so too.
Yeah.
I think it is good. And but I don't see anything wrong with the 3 out of 4 rule.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to pick up with Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kisher from MKS Law, immigration lawyers and partners downtown Vancouver, talking about topics that have been floated out there by the Chief of Staff in the ministry, next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.